Health and medical information from the Billy Meier contacts compiled by David Chance, revised the 25th of October 2023.
Glyphosate. Contact Report 574.
I recently watched a program on television about the poison glyphosate. Glyphosate is the most widely used weed killer in the world. It has been on the market for almost 40 years and is used in huge quantities. It is said that it is safe for the human being to ingest only 0.3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, and that this can be increased to 0.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. You know a lot about these things. What is your opinion about it?
Glyphosate is dangerous and causes cancer, malformations, and miscarriages, as is also the case with all pesticides and herbicides, as well as with all neurotoxins that penetrate and are stored when sprayed on naturally growing foods, such as vegetables, berries, fruits, corn, mushrooms, and grains. These toxins are then absorbed by the human being through food and cause health problems. In addition to cancer, malformations, and miscarriages, all herbicides, pesticides, and neurotoxins that enter the human body through food, pores, and respiration also cause many forms of allergies, although many different diseases also appear, the causes of which are not recognized by terrestrial medical experts. Glyphosate, as well as all other pesticides and all herbicides and neurotoxins, are much more dangerous than chemists, manufacturers, and users falsely claim. On the contrary, the truth is that there is no milligram limit for these substances, because even in the smallest quantities, far below 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight, herbicides and pesticides, as well as neurotoxins, are very dangerous to the human being's health and therefore cause disease. Nevertheless, the World Health Organization and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency consider that the use of these toxins in small quantities is as safe as the use of European authorities. Even the seeds are soaked in neonicotinoids, which also poisons the plants growing from them, and finally, of course, the human being is also involved in the poisonous cycle of chemistry. During growth, the plants absorb the poison, which consists of stable chemical compounds that only break down very weakly and are therefore transferred to the growing plants. Above all, neonicotinoids are used to poison seeds, especially rape, sunflower, and maize. These insecticides are several times more toxic to the human organism than the notorious DDT, which has brought so much misery to countless Earth humans. Neonicotinoids are usually not applied selectively, but often as a preventive measure, which makes the whole thing much worse. Although selective application would have less harmful effects on the human being, the damage to health would still be very serious.
Your explanation is clear and plain and says that the chemists who brew this stuff are lying, as are the manufacturers and users of these poisons.
That is undeniable.
Contact Report 634.
You already said that during our private conversation in 2004, and nothing has changed in any way since then. There is also no change with regard to the criminal spraying of poisons with regard to herbicides and pesticides, because once again, the time has come for the health authorities and the EU dictatorship to legalize the best-selling herbicide glyphosate in Europe and declare it harmless to human health. Consequently, it can be spread in rough quantities and poison the natural foods, the food plants, which are then eaten and poisoned by humans. Glyphosate is used not only in Switzerland, but throughout Europe and even throughout the world on fields and green areas, in orchards, on railway embankments, and in private gardens. The pesticide glyphosate is found in products such as Roundup, Typhoon, Wellkill, or Capito, and is available in the garden departments of Migros, Coop, Landi, Jumbo, or Hornbach. If you can say something again in detail about glyphosate and its effect, as well as about the whole drum and turn of the today's production and the distribution, etc., As far as I know, various companies today produce the poison, worldwide, for example, in China. If you are able to explain something in detail and in a language that even lay people can understand, for example, what insights you have gained from your research into glyphosate and other poisons that are used in agriculture and horticulture, etc., as well as in general in the form of herbicides and pesticides, which are applied on earth and poison everything.
Glyphosate-containing weed killers are used by the ton, not only in agriculture but also by domestic gardeners, horticulturists, and hobby gardeners. Glyphosate products are manufactured by the notorious genetic engineering group Monsanto. The harmful effects on nature, fauna, flora, and humans are not only trivialized and played down but also vehemently denied. Anyone who can prove the harmfulness of substances containing glyphosate in relation to humans and other life forms is silenced by Monsanto's lawyers. Glyphosate, however, is very harmful and also causes cancer, whereby it is not only probably carcinogenic, but inevitably causes cancer, for which even the tiniest amounts in the nanoscale are sufficient, as well as for many other ailments and diseases, which affect humans and animals, etc. The use of the herbicide in any form is not only extremely dangerous to the health of all consumers, and therefore dangerous, but also to their users and consumers such as farmers, horticulturists, plantation operators, house gardeners and hobby gardeners, etc., etc. Our researchers can detect glyphosate and its degradation substances at least in nanoscale regions in the air, in the rain, and even in the atmosphere, as well as in higher nanodoses in groundwater and in the human body and in countless life forms of all genera and species. Glyphosate is therefore a weed killer for the Monsanto group, as we have already talked about, and this toxin is a very dangerous carcinogen of the worst kind, even the tiniest nanoparticles being enough to damage the organism of humans, animals, and all forms of life. Glyphosate-containing weed killers are not only produced by the notorious genetic engineering group Monsanto, but also elsewhere, and they are used by tons by corporations of various kinds and by authorities for weed killing. The harmful, life-threatening, and even life-destroying effects on nature, fauna, and flora, as well as on humans, are deliberately played down or even denied by criminals. And anyone who can prove that glyphosate is harmful in this respect will be silenced by Monsanto's lawyers, because the herbicide glyphosate is a billion-dollar business for the manufacturer of the seed and genetic engineering group Monsanto, based in St. Louis in the U.S. state of Missouri. Glyphosate-containing weed killers are so-called broad-spectrum herbicides, which are toxic to almost all plant species. These toxins have also been produced by other numerous companies since patent protection expired, so that half of the poison supply today comes from China. Glyphosate is one of the most widely used herbicide active ingredients in the world, although it must be said quite clearly that, with regard to the world-famous Roundup, it is in itself much more toxic than its active ingredient glyphosate. And this is because the formula also contains various other toxins, such as formaldehyde, which produces the so-called cocktail effect, which results in a mixture that is much more dangerous and toxic than the individual components alone. As a result, when people and all forms of life come into contact with this mixture and the various toxins penetrate their bodies through the pores, mucous membranes, respiratory tract, and food, the organs and blood are contaminated with all these toxins, which inevitably leads to overall organic damage. This is also the case when in the beginning, which can sometimes last for years, depending on the amount of poison that has penetrated the organism, usually only at the nanoscale, no or only minor ailments and diseases develop. Over time, however, these can result in serious damage, including cancer. It must therefore be emphasized again and again that In the human organism and in all forms of life, even, the smallest amounts of toxic substances are harmful to health even in the nanoscale range and lead to serious suffering and diseases and ultimately to death. It should be noted that as a rule, doctors only rarely recognize the origin of the diseases, and if they still find the cause, then it is too late for the patients because they can no longer be cured of their health damage. Over the years, the effect of glyphosate and the entire mixture on humans, amphibians, fish, animals, reptiles, mammals, and birds has become more extensive, more dangerous, more pathogenic, and more deadly, but this is denied by the manufacturer and the scientific experts he bought, who allegedly investigated the effects of glyphosate and its mixtures and, of course, contrary to the effective truth, could not find any danger for humans and all other life forms. As a rule, it has been said and still is said that if glyphosate or Roundup and all other toxins were used as intended, there would be no health risks for humans and other forms of life, apart from those which would have to be combated, although the opposite would be the case, which is vehemently denied on the one hand. On the other hand, however, the hazardousness of the toxins cannot be determined by the relevant physicians, pathologists, and other specialists, because in still small quantities in the nano range, which are already harmful to health, the toxins cannot be determined due to the lack of analytical ability or are simply concealed if their determination is already possible. And this often happens through so-called doctors and researchers, etc., who are paid horrendously for their silence or their false statements and lies. So it happens that the poison production companies, like Monsanto, the producer of glyphosate, its mixture and other toxins, very quickly go on the counterattack. If not professionals paid by bribes, like private scientists and universities, etc., conduct and publish studies, which expose glyphosate, its mixtures and other poisons as harmful and even deadly for humans, animals and geta animals, etc. If they do not do so, the poison production companies, like for example Monsanto, its mixture and other toxins. Critical researchers and scientists are simply discredited or, if necessary, gagged with threats or violently silenced by the Monsanto Group, as is practically the case with all other toxin product manufacturers. Our research has shown that glyphosate, including its mixtures, is highly toxic to all soils, plants, waters, humans, and all life forms. However, this is also often the case with other toxins, but especially with glyphosate, an accumulation of carcinomas or tumors, growths, nodules, cancer, tumors and growths of the kidney tubules, or the small renal tubules or urinary tubules in the kidneys occurs in the human body, as with various other forms of life. Malignant tumors and tumors in the pancreas also develop in the supporting and connective tissue as a result of even the tiniest nanomagnets of the herbicide, as do skin cancer, lung cancer, and lymph gland cancer to an increased extent. Glyphosate is therefore indisputably a carcinogen, even in the smallest nano amounts. But that is not all. Because our research shows that even the tiniest amounts of glyphosate and all the mixed toxins contained in it cause serious damage in the nanoscale nucleus of the DNA and in the chromosomes of humans, animals and all animals, etc., in the nanoscale range, which also causes autism and physical deformity, especially in offspring growing up in the womb. In agriculture, plantations and horticulture, vegetables, winter rape, pulses, winter barley, and summer cereals in particular are sprayed with the toxin glyphosate, which then settles in these natural foods and poisons the people and other life forms that eat from them. Today, glyphosate or other poison residues are present in practically all staple foods, such as vegetables, oats, maize, soya, wheat, and sugar, etc., and thus in practically all flour products, including pasta and bakery products. The fact that people and all forms of life are poisoned and made suffering and ill with the poison glyphosate, also with other toxins, is of course denied by the toxin production companies. But what happens in agriculture and commercial horticulture is that before sowing, the fields and gardens are sprayed with glyphosate or other toxins to free them from wild plants and weeds that are classified as weeds, which is done before harvesting specifically by Roundup to speed up the ripening of crops. The bottom line is that naturally toxic and carcinogenic residues settle and accumulate in plant food and foodstuffs, which are then consumed by humans. After harvesting, the herbicide is also sprayed on the stubble to prevent weed growth before soil tillage. The Roundup is also marketed under the brand name Glyphos or Glypho Unkraut X and is of course also used for private use in gardens, as well as a garage space or garden path to keep house walls, walkways, stairs, and squares, etc. free of weeds. In principle, this should not be allowed because glyphosate should only be used by competent persons with a corresponding certificate of proof. This should at least be the case, but this is usually not observed anywhere when buying small quantities, not even if you buy more than 1 liter bottle or even a 5-liter canister of the poison, because these are cheaper than small quantities. The poison can be bought unhindered everywhere where it is just sold, because usually, if at all, the buyers are informed only about the fact that they should not buy the means actually, because it is not permitted for the house and house garden range and private range, and because it might be acquired basically only by phytosanitary specialists. As a rule, these are people who have relevant professional training and experience and a phytosanitary examination, such as gardeners, farmers, or persons who have passed a corresponding examination. Such tests should also make it clear that toxins, of whatever kind, should never be present in car parking lots, paved garage spaces, yards, squares and paths, etc. because, in any case, there is always a risk that they will wash into water and massively impair and poison the ecosystem, as happens when they are spread into fields, gardens, and meadows, etc., because the poisons seep into the groundwater and sooner or later reach the plant spray water and drinking water in this way. Unfortunately, however, no purchaser of glyphosate or other poisons is required to indicate exactly where they will use the toxins. So they buy the various poisons or even the most dangerous glyphosate and spray with it very generously, everything that comes before the spray nozzle to them. If rain is then added, the glyphosate or other poison is flushed into the next drain or ditch, where the highly toxic substances drain into the water and poison it. Depending on the amount of glyphosate or other poisons in the water, almost everything that grows and lives and comes into contact with the poisoned water or is contaminated by it through bathing or drinking is poisoned and destroyed, regardless of whether it is algae, amphibians, pure bottom plants, fish, beetles, dragonfly larvae, newts, reptiles, birds, aquatic plants or vertebrates, or even humans. Although humans are neither amphibians nor other forms of life in the wild, what they are able to kill with toxins is harmful to their health and does not leave them untouched, even to the point of death, and even if the glyphosate or other toxins, even if only in the nanoscale, slowly but surely develop into incurable cancer over the years. Earth humans must protect themselves and their environment from weed killers, with the Roundup and its continuation products in the first place, but also all other toxins of all kinds that must not be forgotten. In principle, care must be taken to ensure that regional foodstuffs from an effectively high-quality organic cultivation are used, because these are largely protected from herbicides such as Roundup, as well as from pesticide contamination. However, this does not mean that organic products can be absolutely protected from toxins, but kept, planted, bred, grown, and harvested in a state that contains an absolute minimum of toxins. These move in minimal nano areas, which of course does not prevent suffering and diseases, but can minimize them. It should be borne in mind that minute amounts of toxins of all kinds are also contained in the air, in rainwater and groundwater, and thus in splash water for the organic products, even if these cannot be detected by earthly analysis equipment, which is still very inadequate as a result of the minute quantities of nanomaterials of herbicides and pesticides, at least not yet today. It must also be said that many wild plants that have fallen into disrepute as weeds, provided they are edible for humans, have a much higher nutritional value than any cultivated vegetable.
In 1971, Monsanto patented glyphosate as a herbicide, and since then the Roundup alone has generated annual sales of $2 billion. I have read about this, as well as that in Switzerland alone 300 tons of glyphosate are sold each year, poisoning fields, gardens and private gardens, waters as well as roads, railway embankments, paths, and meadows. Whereas in Germany, according to surveys by the University of Göttingen, glyphosate is currently sprayed on 39% of the arable land. However, the poison companies deny any connection with their poisons and the health damages of many people. But according to a new study, this is no longer so easy because it, carried out by the International Agency for Research on Cancer IARC, an institution of the WHO, proves the opposite. The study was published in March 2015 in the journal Lancet Oncology, highlighting 5 organophosphates used as herbicides or pesticides that are highly carcinogenic, including the herbicide glyphosate, which is classified in the 2A group, which includes substances that definitely cause cancer in humans, animals, getaways, and all life forms. This study is a meta-study conducted since 2001 and relates to various studies in the USA, Canada, and Sweden. Cancer experts from 11 countries unanimously concluded that Roundup causes cancer in animals. What happens to people in this regard was probably also taken into consideration, but what this has resulted in is clear.
I am aware of that, but the companies producing toxins are probably not deterred by it.
You're probably right, because they have tremendous power that reaches as far as the governments, where various bribes are addicted, who hold out their hollow hands.
That is undeniably so, therefore I have nothing about it.
Contact Report 649.
The environmental poisoning by herbicides and pesticides and other chemical products of the chemical companies contaminates the whole soil in an immense way and on a large scale, especially the soils of the agricultural and horticultural areas, but also the groundwater and all waters in general. It also affects the atmosphere and thus the air inhaled by humans and all forms of life, which inevitably leads to a variety of allergies, epidemics, diseases, suffering, deformities, possibly pandemics and epidemics, as well as numerous deaths among humans and the death of animals, many animals and plants. The carcinogenic and lethal glyphosate is particularly worth mentioning, as it is criminally described as harmless by the manufacturer, but also by the responsible authorities and the EU dictatorship.
Contact Report 675.
The poison glyphosate is once again a widespread topic of conversation, because it is irresponsibly declared harmless and harmless to humans. Perhaps it would be good if you would say something about it again, because that would certainly be important.
Against all denials of the manufacturer Monsanto, its expert judges and the governments and health authorities which call the herbicide or total herbicide glyphosate as harmless and not harmful to human health, exactly the opposite is the case. As a result of your interest, we have been able to prove in large-scale research that glyphosate is life-threatening to humans and all fauna organisms even in the smallest amounts. In humans alone, cancer and many other diseases and ailments are caused by glyphosate, but all mammals and other life forms also suffer health damage in many ways, even from minimal amounts of glyphosate, which is extremely toxic. The diversity of plant species is also impaired by this, and over time is even brought to extinction. In addition, even the slightest amount of glyphosate is deposited in the plants which serve as food for humans and mammals, etc., when treated with the herbicide. Therefore, the smallest amounts of toxic glyphosate residues can be found in foods naturally produced for human consumption and also in industrially produced foods, as well as in forage plants and waters that serve as food and drinking water for wildlife and small organisms. Enrichments as toxic residues are also found in all kinds of feeding stuffs, in particular in products used in agriculture for feeding horses, cattle, pigs, and poultry. Toxic glyphosate residues, however, are also contained in food for life forms kept by terrestrial humans as household members, such as dogs, cats, birds, mice, rats, and hamsters, etc. Due to the low glyphosate residues in the natural food plants, these are thus transported in various ways into the food of humans and all living beings, and consequently the food meat of slaughtered animals is also contaminated, which is consumed by humans. This in turn leads to malformations in newborns, miscarriages, kidney damage, and various types of cancer. According to our research, glyphosate damages the environment and health of humans, fauna, and flora in a way that is not even excessively characteristic of all other known herbicides. And when it rains, the glyphosate applied is flushed by the plants and paths, etc., sprayed with it into the next sewage ditches, into the sewage systems, into brooks, ponds, and rivers, but it also seeps away underground and poisons the groundwater because glyphosate is highly toxic to water. Depending on the dose, glyphosate in water destroys almost everything that lives and grows in it, whether fish, insects, newts, frogs, dragonfly larvae, algae, or aquatic plants, as well as many terrestrial organisms, die from it and at least become ill and sick when they drink the water contaminated with glyphosate. And what kills the fauna and flora also leaves its mark on humans, making them sick and suffering, following which they suffer from cancer, allergies, epidemics, and diseases due to glyphosate residues and die miserably. And in this way it goes on for years, in which glyphosate gradually creates cancer, diseases, sufferings, and epidemics. This also includes autism, which usually develops in the mother's womb in food contaminated by glyphosate and is then absorbed by the newborn through the mother's milk, which is also contaminated. But glyphosate does not only affect farmers, whom I have mentioned in relation to agriculture, because it also affects all gardeners and hobby gardeners, railway workers and chicory workers, etc., who deal directly with glyphosate and take in glyphosate residues via skin pores and possibly also via the mouth, which also settle in all basic foodstuffs. Glyphosate is thus found in barley, oats, rice, rye and wheat, and via these also in many flour products, such as pasta and bakery products, but also in cereal flakes of all kinds, as well as in maize, soya, and sugar, etc., but vegetables and berries are also affected, as is drinking water, because the toxic substances, as already mentioned, seep into the groundwater, and sooner or later this is used by humans for food preparation and also drunk by all imaginable creatures. And if glyphosate is ingested by humans through food and drink, even in small amounts, it will sooner or later have a toxic effect, even on mothers with regard to mother's milk, which in one way or another damages the health of fetuses in the womb, as well as causing malformations and miscarriages. Also, respiratory problems and skin diseases are caused by glyphosate, as well as an increasing loss of biological diversity, such as the rapid death of bees. Glyphosate also triggers chronic botulism in cattle, a poisoning disease that can affect both humans and all mammals. Even in small amounts, glyphosate and other glyphosate-containing substances damage human embryonic and placenta cells, as well as the DNA of humans, amphibians, animals, reptiles, birds, fish, other aquatic organisms, and all kinds of other life forms. In the human body, glyphosate can lead to complete cell death within just 24 hours. Glyphosate also paves the way for Alzheimer's and diabetes, and, as already mentioned, for cancer and all sorts of diseases and body diseases, as well as for depression, heart attacks, and infertility in both sexes. Glyphosate also has very high negative effects on soil fertility and overall soil organisms. Certain pathogenic parasitic molds are also promoted, such as fusarium fungi that kill their host. Micronutrients can no longer be absorbed by microorganisms, and fungi and plants can no longer defend themselves against disease, which means that earthworms, which are indispensable for the aeration of soils, die out or avoid soils contaminated with glyphosate. Glyphosate appears in the urine of humans, animals, and other living organisms of various species, even if they have not come into direct contact with glyphosate when spraying plants, soil, water, etc. There is a classical or acute botulism and a chronic or visceral botulism, whereby both forms are caused by toxins of the bacterium Clostridium botulinum, whereby especially the nerve toxin BONT or neurotoxin is of enormous importance and the strongest toxin at all. In purely theoretical terms, a mere 40 grams would suffice to destroy the entire earthly human race. If the symptoms of botulism are considered in diseased cattle, then emaciation or a life-threatening emaciation, as well as a drop in performance, such as in consumption or tuberculosis and cancer, are noticeable. Further symptoms are a duck run, also known as watchel run, as well as a pulled-up belly, staggering and limited reflexes, whereby also a disturbed drinking behavior and continuous salivation are typical, as well as abomasal dislocations and non-healing skin wounds, as well as rumen paralysis or paralysis of the largest of the three preomacs, which serves as a large fermentation chamber. Botulism bacteria primarily multiply in meat and plants when they fall into decay. If cattle ingest such bacteria through food that is interspersed with the neurotoxin BONT, a case of classical botulism arises. Chronic botulism is initially caused solely by the spores of the botulism bacteria when they are ingested with food and only begin to act and germinate in the intestinal tract. Cattle suffering from chronic botulism due to chronic glyphosate poisoning become permanent excretors of spores of botulism bacteria. This also creates an increased and permanent risk of infection for uninfected animals, which can also infect farmers, other people, and other living creatures. In humans, an infection can lead to eyelid heaviness, muscle weakness, difficulty swallowing, such as a dip in the throat, and a frequent urge to urinate with a persistent feeling of residual urine. Glyphosate kills all health-promoting bacteria in the stomach and intestines of humans, cattle, and all forms of life, thus causing severe damage to the intestinal flora, which means that bacteria of all kinds, especially the botulism bacterium, can no longer be sufficiently repelled.
However, the policy does not do anything about it, and consequently, the prospects for an effective hazard classification with regard to glyphosate and thus a corresponding ban on the dangerous active substance are not considered at all. It is disillusioning that Monsanto and the majority of health researchers, Politicians and governments have known for about 20 years that glyphosate contains life-threatening substances for all living beings. However, this is irresponsibly trivialized or fundamentally denied, and many people continue to die of cancer and other diseases and ailments, as well as many birth defects caused by glyphosate. On the whole, there has been little or no political action so far to ban glyphosate as a matter of principle, so that it can only be assumed whether it will ever be banned at all. The fact is that many of the politicians and commissioners are high-ranking employees who have to decide on such things, and they stand for genetically modified feed and food closely linked to the agro-industry, who are paid horrendously for their support for the production and sale of glyphosate and so on. If one looks at these politicians, commissioners and high-ranking employees who vote for glyphosate and other toxic pesticides and their residues, it is clear that some of these proponents are or have been closely associated with, among others, toxin producers, such as the large corporations BASF, Bayer, Monsanto, and Syngenta, etc. And these are corporations that are massively opposed to a ban on certain pesticides and that all have products containing glyphosate in their product ranges. If one considers that Monsanto alone with its glyphosate-containing product Roundup has a turnover of $2 billion, then it should be absolutely clear that all other agrochemical companies and their representatives are also earning large fortunes and are therefore already trying to prevent a ban on this active ingredient. Your findings alone make it absolutely clear that glyphosate, the plant destroyer, is highly hostile to life and even deadly to humans, fauna, and flora, and thus to the whole world. However, the fact that so far, from a political point of view, not enough has been done to ban glyphosate in its production, sale, and use can effectively be seen as political failure. It is simply incomprehensible that, despite all negative signs, glyphosate-containing products may continue to be produced, sold, and distributed on a massive scale, although an immediate halt to production, sale, and use must be the only correct measure that can be considered.
The fact is that our research clearly proves that glyphosate causes health and other damage and even death to humans, fauna, and flora.
The interests of agriculture and large-scale horticulture should no longer be given economic precedence, but immediate action should be taken wherever glyphosate has long caused serious damage to fauna and flora, and is still causing increasing damage, especially to human health. An immediate halt to the production, sale, and use of glyphosate is of the utmost urgency, as treated food and feed causes death, extinction of fauna and flora, and spoilage. Last but not least, the entire political system must also be called into question, which does not assume its responsibility, and allows Monsanto and the poison economy as a whole to exert pressure on farmers and nurseries to achieve ever higher yields, as do Monsanto and other poison corporations, ever more horrendous profits, regardless of people, nature, its fauna and flora, water, and the entire environment.
That is also according to my sense.